Ryan stood in the wide docking bay of the station, his heart beating faster than usual. The walls of the bay were tall, lined with bright strips of light that made the silver floor shine. Above, large glass panels showed the red star burning in space. He had never seen a star so close before. It glowed like a great fire in the dark, and he felt both fear and wonder at the sight. This was his first time leaving Earth, and he wanted to make a strong impression. Humans were still new to the great station called Veyros, where many species met for trade and knowledge. Ryan had trained for months to be here, yet when the moment arrived he felt his mouth dry and his palms damp with sweat. He had been told that first contact was never easy. Words mattered, and so did respect. A small translator unit hovered beside him. It was a round device with blinking lights, programmed to understand thousands of alien languages. It was supposed to help him communicate. Yet inside, Ryan hoped he would not need to rely on it too much. His mind was stubborn. He wanted to try on his own, even if it meant making mistakes. The doors at the far end opened with a soft hiss. From the lighted corridor, a figure stepped inside. She was taller than him, her form graceful and fluid. Her skin was pale silver with a faint shimmer, like moonlight reflected on water. Her eyes were large and bright, a color between blue and green, glowing softly under the station lights. She wore a long robe that moved with her steps, each motion calm and sure. Ryan took a step forward, feeling the translator hum at his side. The device clicked, ready to catch her speech. But before it could react, she spoke first. Her voice was light and quick, filled with musical tones. The words carried a rhythm that sounded almost like singing. Ryan stood frozen for a moment, listening, then tried to copy what he heard. The sounds left his mouth awkward and uneven. His tongue stumbled, and his voice cracked on the softer tones. The alien girl tilted her head, and then a sudden laugh broke from her lips. It was not cruel, but it was sharp and clear. She laughed at the way he spoke. Ryan's cheeks grew warm. Still, he refused to back down. He repeated the phrase again, slower this time. He stretched the vowels, shaped the consonants, and pushed his voice into the strange rise and fall of her speech. Again, it sounded broken. Again, she laughed. Her laugh echoed in the wide docking bay, bouncing from the metal walls. Other travelers passing by looked over with mild interest. Some shook their heads, others smiled, but no one stepped in. The girl spoke another sentence, longer this time, as if daring him to follow. Ryan tried. His attempt twisted into strange sounds, and again laughter filled the air. He felt both foolish and challenged. His eyes narrowed slightly. He had grown up on Earth in a place where many languages mixed, and he had often tried to learn from travelers there. The patterns of speech had always fascinated him. Now, faced with a living puzzle, he felt his determination rise. The translator unit hummed, offering him the safe choice of a clear reply in Standard. He ignored it. Instead, he raised his chin and tried again. Each mistake made her shoulders shake with more laughter. Yet behind the laughter he saw something else. Her eyes were not cruel. They were curious, almost playful, as if she was waiting to see how far he would go. He kept speaking until his throat grew tight. He shaped sound after sound, each time closer to the rhythm he had heard. At last he paused, breathing hard. The girl's laughter softened into a smile. She placed a hand over her chest, then pointed at herself. With a slow and careful tone, she said, "Alira." Ryan blinked, then nodded. She was telling him her name. He touched his chest in return. "Ryan," he said firmly. For the first time, her smile changed. It was not mocking now but gentle. She repeated his name with surprising ease. The translator unit hovered silently, unused. Ryan felt a small spark of pride. Even if he had failed at her words, he had earned something else. He had earned her attention. The docking bay grew busier as more ships arrived. Voices of many species filled the air, each different in pitch and rhythm. Ryan glanced around and then back at Alira. She watched him closely, as if deciding what to think of him. He straightened his shoulders, forcing calm into his voice. He would not be the human who gave up after a laugh. When the station bell rang, signaling the hour, Alira motioned for him to follow. She walked with long steps toward the inner gates of the station. Ryan followed, his thoughts racing. He had not impressed her with skill, but perhaps with persistence. The laugh still echoed in his ears, yet it no longer burned like shame. Instead, it drove him forward. He whispered her name under his breath, repeating it until it felt smooth. Alira. Each time he said it, he understood a little more about the shape of her words. He promised himself that by the next time she spoke to him, he would be ready. And so the first meeting between Ryan and Alira ended not in success, but in determination. The docking bay doors closed behind them, and the path into the heart of the station opened before them. Ryan walked forward, knowing that his struggle with words had just begun. The main hall of the station stretched wide before Ryan. The ceiling arched high, covered in shining panels that reflected light like crystal. Dozens of species moved in streams across the polished floor. Some were tall with long limbs, others small and quick with bright colors on their skin. The air hummed with many voices, a mix of tones that blended like a living storm. Ryan walked behind Alira, trying to keep his pace steady. She moved with ease, gliding between groups as if the hall belonged to her. Now and then she turned her head to see if he was still following. Her smile carried that same playful edge as before, the memory of his broken words still fresh. When they reached a quiet corner near a wall of green plants, she stopped. A round table stood there, made of smooth black stone. Alira motioned for him to sit, and he lowered himself into the chair. The seat adjusted to his shape, soft and comfortable. He tried not to show his surprise, but Alira caught the flicker in his eyes and gave a small laugh. She leaned forward and spoke again in her flowing tongue. Ryan listened closely. Her words rose and fell like a river, fast in some places and gentle in others. He tried to repeat the sounds, his lips shaping the syllables with care. The result came out rough and uneven. Alira covered her mouth with her hand, but laughter still escaped. Her shoulders shook, and her eyes sparkled with amusement. Ryan felt the heat rise in his face. His accent was clumsy, yes, but he would not allow her laughter to defeat him. He tried again, slower this time, and again the laughter came. Nearby travelers paused as they passed the table. A tall reptilian creature stopped for a moment, tilting its head at the sight of a human struggling with alien words. Then it walked on. A group of feathered beings whispered among themselves, clearly entertained. Ryan clenched his fists under the table. But he did not stop. Each attempt drew more laughter from Alira, but it also gave him a clearer sense of how her language worked. He listened to the rhythm, the pauses between words, the way her voice stretched vowels into long notes. He repeated, stumbled, corrected, and stumbled again. Finally, he sat back and let out a breath. His throat ached, his tongue felt heavy, and sweat touched his brow. Alira's laughter softened into a smile that was no longer sharp but almost warm. She tapped the table with her slender fingers, then leaned closer. She spoke slowly now, breaking down her words into smaller pieces. Ryan's eyes widened. She was teaching him. Her first word was short and simple. He copied it. She nodded. Then she gave a longer phrase. He tried, failing on the second sound. She laughed, but this time her laugh was lighter, less mocking. She repeated the phrase, and he followed. By the third attempt, she gave a small nod of approval. Ryan felt a spark of triumph. Each correct sound was a small victory. The translator unit hovered quietly at his side, unused. The device could have solved everything in seconds, yet it would never give him this moment of progress. Alira pointed at herself again. "Alira," she said. Then she pointed at him. "Ryan." She repeated his name carefully, rolling the R with ease. He tried her name once more, this time with more confidence. She smiled, pleased. For the next hour, they stayed at the table, exchanging sounds. Sometimes she laughed until her eyes shone with tears. Sometimes she tilted her head in approval when he managed to copy her correctly. Ryan's voice grew rough, but he pressed on, determined to learn as much as he could. When at last they paused, Alira rested her chin on her hand and studied him. She spoke a sentence too quick for him to follow. When he shook his head, she repeated it more slowly. The meaning was still lost to him, but he caught enough to sense it was a question. Ryan leaned forward and said in standard, "I will learn. I will understand your words." She tilted her head, listening carefully to the tone if not the meaning. Then she gave a soft laugh, not mocking this time but almost kind. She tapped the table again, as if sealing a promise. Ryan felt tired, yet stronger inside. The memory of her early laughter no longer stung. Instead, it gave him fuel. Each laugh was proof that he was trying, that he was climbing a wall that others might not even dare to touch. As the station lights dimmed slightly to mark the change of cycle, Alira stood and motioned for him to follow again. They walked together through a quieter hall filled with tall windows. Outside, the red star burned like a giant eye, and smaller ships moved in steady lines between the station and the dark beyond. Alira spoke lightly as they walked, pointing at objects, naming them in her tongue. Ryan repeated each word, his voice rough but steady. She laughed at his accent, but her laughter carried no cruelty now. It sounded like music, a rhythm to guide him forward. When they reached a lift, she pressed her hand against the panel, and the door slid open. They stepped inside. The lift rose smoothly, carrying them higher into the station. Ryan looked at her profile in the soft light. She seemed calm, almost proud. For the first time since his arrival, he felt that perhaps her laughter was not meant to push him away. Perhaps it was her way of drawing him in, of testing if he would stand firm or turn back. As the lift doors opened to another level filled with glowing arches and quiet halls, Ryan stepped out with new resolve. He would not stop until he could speak her language clearly. The alien girl had laughed at his accent, but one day he would give her a reason to stop laughing and start listening. The room assigned to Ryan was small but neat. A soft bed stretched across one side, and a clear screen on the wall showed the endless dark of space. He placed his small travel bag on the floor and sat down, letting out a long breath. The meeting with Alira replayed in his mind again and again. Her laughter, sharp at first, had slowly changed into something gentler, and each sound reminded him of his struggle. He touched his throat. It felt sore from hours of speaking. Still, he smiled faintly. He had managed to copy some of her words. Not many, not well, but enough to prove to himself that it was possible. He had grown up hearing many tongues back on Earth. Some were harsh, some smooth, and some difficult to master. His neighbors had spoken different dialects, and as a child he had loved listening, trying to copy them. That same joy stirred in him now. Ryan stood and walked to the table where a datapad rested. He opened it, and the screen lit with symbols. The station's archive had recordings of many languages, and Alira's tongue was among them. He tapped play, and a soft voice filled the room, repeating words slowly. The sounds rolled through the air. Ryan closed his eyes and repeated them. His first attempts were rough. He stopped, listened again, and tried once more. His throat tightened as he forced strange shapes from his mouth. At times he coughed, at times he laughed at himself, but he never stopped. Hours passed. He broke the words apart, copying single sounds, then joining them again. He pressed his ear close to the datapad, hunting for small differences in tone. Sometimes he caught a mistake, sometimes he missed it. Each time he corrected himself, his confidence grew a little stronger. The night cycle came. The station lights outside dimmed, and the red star shrank as panels shielded the glass. The room grew quiet, but Ryan stayed awake. His eyes burned with tiredness, yet he repeated the words again and again. He wanted to be ready for the next time he saw Alira. At one point he stood before the mirror. He watched his lips move, his tongue shift, his jaw stretch. He whispered, testing the sounds carefully. He noticed that her language flowed like water, never sharp or sudden. Each word linked to the next with soft bridges. He practiced until his voice cracked. Finally, he sat on the bed and rested for a moment. The datapad voice spoke again, and this time his reply came smoother. He almost believed he heard the same rhythm in his own speech. His chest filled with a small flame of pride. Ryan thought of Alira's laughter. The memory no longer made him feel weak. Instead, it gave him strength. She had tested him, and he had not given up. Tomorrow, he would show her progress. Morning cycle came too soon. A soft chime rang through the room, and the wall brightened with new light. Ryan rubbed his eyes and stood. His body felt heavy from lack of sleep, but his spirit felt sharp. He dressed quickly and walked out, the datapad still in his hand. The halls of the station were alive again with sound and color. Beings of every shape moved past him, some tall with long arms, others round with shells that gleamed. Ryan walked through the crowd, repeating words under his breath. A few travelers looked at him with raised brows, but he paid them no mind. When he reached the gathering hall, he saw her. Alira stood near a group of her people, their silver skin shining under the lights. She was speaking with them in quick tones, her voice light and strong. Ryan paused, listening. He caught pieces of sound, some familiar from his long night of study. His heart raced. At last she turned and saw him. Her lips curved into a small smile, and she stepped forward. She spoke a phrase in her language, the same playful rhythm as before. He knew she expected him to stumble again. Ryan drew a breath. His throat still felt raw, but his voice came steady. He repeated her words. They were not perfect, but they were clear. The change in her face was immediate. Her smile froze, her eyes widened, and her body went still. She stared at him as if he had just broken a wall that should not be broken. The other aliens near her turned their heads sharply. For a long moment the hall grew quiet. Ryan stood straight, meeting her gaze. His chest rose and fell with pride. For the first time, he had spoken her tongue in a way that carried meaning. The long hours of practice had not been wasted. Alira finally blinked and spoke again, this time slower. Her words flowed with care, and he caught enough to reply. His answer was rough, but it was true speech. The silver-skinned beings behind her murmured among themselves. Some looked impressed, others doubtful, but all were surprised. Alira leaned closer, her bright eyes fixed on him. Her voice lowered, and she asked a question he could not fully understand. Still, he replied with the few words he knew, shaping them with care. She listened, and for the first time there was no laughter in her eyes. The translator unit at his side gave a soft hum, waiting to be used, but he ignored it. He wanted this exchange to belong to him, not to a machine. At last, Alira straightened and gave a slow nod. She spoke one final word, clear and soft. Ryan recognized it from his studies. It meant respect. The hall buzzed again as the moment ended, but the memory of her frozen stare remained in Ryan's mind. He had crossed a line that few expected a human to cross. He felt both proud and nervous. What would come next, he did not know. But one thing was certain. The alien girl who had laughed at his accent now looked at him with new eyes. And Ryan, though tired and worn, knew he was only at the beginning of something far greater. The hall of the station was never silent. Voices filled the air, a constant stream of words in many tones and languages. Yet in the moment after Ryan spoke Alira's tongue, all sounds seemed to fade. A circle of stillness formed around them. Alira's bright eyes stayed locked on his face. Her smile was gone, replaced by surprise so sharp that it almost looked like fear. She stood very still, as if she could not believe what she had heard. The other silver-skinned beings near her whispered quickly to one another. Their voices rose and fell like waves, sharp with confusion. Ryan felt his heart beating hard in his chest, but he did not look away. He knew his words had not been perfect, yet he had spoken clearly enough to be understood. For him, that was a triumph. For them, it was something more. Finally, Alira spoke again. Her voice was slower now, softer, as though she was testing him. She gave him a phrase with careful rhythm. Ryan listened, caught the shape of it, and repeated. His voice stumbled on one sound, but the meaning still reached her. Alira's breath caught. The other aliens stepped back slightly, giving them space. A tall one with markings across his cheeks spoke in a firm tone, pointing at Ryan. Alira answered quickly, her words sharp and quick now, no longer playful. Ryan could not follow the full exchange, but he sensed the weight of it. The tall one looked doubtful, even angry, yet Alira's voice carried strength. She turned back to Ryan and studied him closely. Then, to his surprise, she gave a small bow of her head. The gesture was simple, but the meaning was clear. She was showing him respect. Around them, the hall began to buzz again. Other travelers from different species stopped to look. A group of feathered beings tilted their heads, their eyes wide. A pair of scaled traders spoke in low voices, clearly impressed. The moment had spread beyond Alira's people. Ryan realized that word of this would not stay hidden. The translator unit at his side blinked with quiet lights, still unused. He touched it briefly, then let his hand fall away. This was not the machine's victory. It was his own. Alira spoke again, her tone calm now. She reached out and touched his arm lightly, guiding him away from the crowd. They moved down a side hall, leaving behind the whispers and stares. Ryan walked beside her, his mind racing. When they reached a quiet chamber lined with tall windows, she stopped. The red star outside burned bright, filling the room with warm light. She turned to him, her face serious. Slowly, she spoke, breaking her words into simple parts. Ryan caught some of them, enough to sense her meaning. She wanted to know how he had done it. How a human, so new to the station, could speak her language after only a short meeting. Ryan took a deep breath. He answered in standard, since he lacked the words in her tongue. On Earth, many languages live together. My people grow hearing many voices. I listened to you. I studied. I tried. That is all. Alira listened, her eyes narrowing in thought. She repeated one of his phrases, pointing at him as she spoke. Ryan understood she was asking again, pressing for truth. He gave the same answer, this time adding the few words in her language that he knew for listen and learn. His voice shook but the words came through. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she gave a slow nod. Her serious face softened into a faint smile. It was not the sharp laughter from before. It was something new, something that carried both respect and curiosity. Ryan felt his chest grow lighter. The tension of the moment eased. He had not only surprised her, he had convinced her. Outside the window, a fleet of small ships moved in perfect lines across the dark. Their lights twinkled as they passed, silent but full of meaning. Ryan watched them, then looked back at Alira. He sensed that this was only the beginning of a larger change. The door opened behind them, and two more of her people entered. They spoke quickly with Alira, their voices low and serious. She replied, her tone steady. Then she turned back to Ryan and motioned for him to follow. They walked through more halls, past tall arches and glowing panels. Everywhere, beings moved aside to watch them. Ryan caught the looks in their eyes: curiosity, doubt, sometimes even respect. Whispers followed them, and he knew the story of what had happened was already spreading. At last they entered a chamber shaped like a circle. The ceiling was high and the floor smooth. Seats lined the edges, and in the center stood a raised platform. This was a place of meeting, perhaps for leaders or councils. Ryan felt a chill run through him. Alira guided him to the center. She spoke to the room in her language, her voice carrying strength. The listeners, a mix of her people and others, leaned forward. Then she gestured to Ryan. He understood at once. She was presenting him. Ryan's mouth went dry. He swallowed hard, then stepped forward. He thought of all the hours he had practiced, all the mistakes, all the laughter. Now he stood before many, and he had only a handful of words in her tongue. But he refused to back down. He spoke, using what little he had. The words were broken, the sounds heavy, but the meaning was there. He introduced himself. He said his name. He said he had listened, and he had learned. The hall fell silent for a breath. Then voices rose, some in surprise, some in argument. Ryan stood tall, letting the sound wash over him. He had done it. He had spoken where no one expected him to speak. Alira's eyes shone as she looked at him. She gave a small nod, proud and firm. For her, the shock of the moment had turned into something greater. She had seen not just a human, but a bridge between worlds. And for Ryan, standing in the center of that circle, it was clear. The laughter of yesterday had turned into respect today. But the journey ahead would test him even more. The council chamber slowly emptied after the meeting. Voices still echoed in the tall hall, but most of the leaders and travelers had already left. Ryan stood in the center of the room, his heart still beating fast. He felt drained, yet alive. He had spoken in front of them all, even with his broken words. It was not perfect, but it was real. Alira walked back to him, her silver robe brushing the smooth floor. Her eyes no longer carried laughter. Instead, they carried weight. She looked at him with a new kind of interest, as if she had discovered something she did not expect. She spoke to him slowly, choosing each word with care. He caught some of it, but not all. He heard her say his name, then a phrase he did not know. She tilted her head, waiting. Ryan answered in standard, his voice steady. I learned because I wanted to. I listened to your sounds. I studied them. I practiced all night. That is the truth. Alira frowned slightly, not from anger but from thought. She repeated the phrase again, this time slower. Ryan recognized a few parts now. She was asking how. How could he have done this when others could not? Ryan searched for the right words in her tongue. He pieced together what little he knew. He placed a hand on his chest and said, human. Many tongues. We hear. We learn. His voice cracked, but the meaning carried through. Alira blinked. Her bright eyes softened. She took a slow breath and gave a small nod. Then she sat down on one of the curved seats and motioned for him to sit across from her. Ryan obeyed, lowering himself into the seat. The chamber was quiet now, filled only with the distant hum of the station's engines. The red star outside shone through tall windows, painting the room in warm light. Alira leaned forward. She spoke again, this time in longer phrases. Ryan struggled to keep up. He missed much, but he caught words like people, world, voice, and change. She seemed to be telling him about her own kind. Her voice carried pride but also sadness. Ryan listened carefully, nodding when he understood. He wished he had more words to answer her, but he stayed silent rather than break the meaning. She seemed to appreciate his effort to listen, even when he could not reply. At last she paused. She looked at him closely and asked a single word. It was sharp, rising at the end. A question. Ryan thought for a moment and realized she was asking about Earth. He smiled faintly. He pointed upward, then outward, and said in her language, Earth. My home. He added simple words he knew, shaping them slowly. Many voices. Many people. One world. Alira repeated the words after him, testing the sound of Earth. She tilted her head, considering, then gave a soft laugh, not mocking this time, but almost gentle. She touched her chest and spoke of her own home world. The word was long and full of flowing sounds, almost like a song. Ryan tried to copy it, and his attempt made her laugh again. Yet now her laughter was warm, not sharp. They sat for a long while, trading words. She would speak, he would repeat. Sometimes she corrected him, sometimes she simply smiled at his effort. With every exchange, he felt the wall between them grow thinner. Finally, Alira grew quiet. She leaned back in her seat, her eyes thoughtful. She said something in her tongue that he did not fully catch, but he heard the word respect again. She looked at him with calm strength, as though she had accepted something. Ryan's chest tightened. He understood then that this was no longer about laughter or language alone. Something deeper had begun. A bond of trust, small but real, was forming. He stood slowly and gave a small bow of his head, copying the gesture she had shown earlier. "Respect," he said in her tongue. Her lips curved into a faint smile. She stood as well, and for the first time, she bowed her head back to him. The motion was graceful, filled with meaning. The doors of the chamber opened, and other beings entered. They spoke to Alira in urgent tones, their voices quick. She replied calmly, but her eyes stayed on Ryan for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked with them, leaving him standing in the quiet. Ryan remained still for a long time, his mind racing. He thought of her words, her questions, her sudden shift from laughter to respect. He thought of how humans, though new to this station, carried a gift that others did not expect. The gift of listening, of learning, of adapting. At last he left the chamber and walked through the halls of the station. The whispers followed him again. Travelers turned their heads as he passed. Some smiled, some frowned, but all watched. When he reached his small room once more, he sat on the bed and closed his eyes. The image of Alira's face filled his mind. Her shock, her laughter, her respect. He realized he had crossed a line that could not be crossed back. This was no longer only about words. It was about connection. And deep inside, Ryan knew that the path ahead would be harder, but also brighter. For the first time, he felt that a bridge between his world and hers was truly possible. The station corridors were busy as always, filled with travelers, traders, and officers moving between halls. But for Ryan, the air felt different now. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him. Some were curious, some doubtful, and some even carried respect. The story of the human who spoke the silver tongue had already spread. Ryan walked carefully, trying not to show his unease. He knew he had not mastered the language. He had only taken the first steps. Yet somehow, those steps had shaken the station. He wondered how such a small act could matter so much. He did not have to wait long for answers. Later that day, Alira found him in the main garden chamber. The chamber was filled with tall plants from many worlds, their leaves glowing faintly under hidden lights. Water flowed in thin streams across stone paths, and the air carried a soft scent of flowers. It was one of the few places in the station that felt calm. Alira walked toward him with steady steps. Her silver skin caught the glow of the plants, and her eyes were bright with purpose. She spoke his name softly, then sat on a stone bench beside the water. Ryan joined her, feeling the quiet weight of her presence. For a while, she did not speak. She seemed to be choosing her words with care. Finally, she began, her voice lower than usual. Ryan listened hard. He caught words like people, memory, struggle, and hope. He pieced them together and realized she was telling him about her world. She spoke of long wars in the past, of her people scattered among stars, of their need to protect their language because it carried their history. As she spoke, her voice grew softer, and her eyes seemed far away. Ryan stayed silent, giving her all his attention. Even when he could not follow every word, he listened to the music of her voice, the rhythm of her heart hidden in the sound. He felt the weight of her story, and it moved him deeply. When she paused, Ryan tried to answer. His words were simple, broken, but honest. He told her about Earth, about how many languages lived side by side, sometimes in peace, sometimes in conflict. He told her how his people had learned to survive by listening, by adapting, by finding common ground. Alira tilted her head, her eyes softening as she listened. She did not laugh this time. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if she understood not just his words but the feeling behind them. For the next hour, they traded more words. She pointed to objects around them, naming each one in her tongue. He repeated, sometimes failing, sometimes managing to copy the sound. She corrected him gently, never mocking. At times, she even repeated his attempts in standard, showing that she too was willing to learn. Ryan felt something shift inside him. This was no longer only about language. It was about respect flowing both ways. She was teaching him, and in return, she was letting him teach her. Other travelers passed through the garden and paused to watch. Some whispered, surprised to see a human and a silver one speaking side by side. Others shook their heads, as if they did not believe it would last. Ryan ignored them. His focus stayed on Alira, and hers stayed on him. At one point, she leaned closer and asked him a question. He caught enough to understand she wanted to know why he had tried so hard. Why had he not used the translator, like everyone else? Ryan thought carefully before answering. He placed a hand on his chest and spoke slowly in her tongue, shaping each word with care. Because machine cannot give respect. Only voice can. Alira's eyes widened slightly. She did not laugh. She looked at him for a long time, then gave a small smile. It was the kind of smile that carried warmth, not amusement. The bond between them grew stronger with every word. When the cycle changed and the lights dimmed, Alira stood and motioned for him to follow. They walked together through the quieter halls of the station. The whispers followed them again, but this time Ryan did not feel uneasy. He felt proud. They passed a wide balcony that looked out over space. The red star glowed in the distance, and beyond it stretched the endless dark. Ryan stopped to look, his breath catching at the sight. Alira joined him, silent for a moment. Then she spoke softly, almost to herself. He caught only a few words, but one of them was bridge. He guessed what she meant. Perhaps she was saying that he had become a bridge between her world and his. Ryan turned and gave a small nod. He repeated the word bridge in her tongue, his voice steady. She looked at him, and for the first time, she did not correct him. They stood there for a long time, side by side, watching the ships move across the stars. That night, when Ryan returned to his room, he felt lighter than before. The memory of Alira's early laughter no longer stung. It had turned into something else, something far more meaningful. She no longer laughed at him, she spoke with him. She listened to him. And he listened to her. In the quiet of his room, Ryan whispered her name again. Alira. The sound was smoother now, closer to how she had said it. He smiled faintly, knowing he was making progress. For the first time since leaving Earth, Ryan felt he belonged. Not because of machines, not because of orders, but because of his own effort to reach across the barrier of words. The bond between him and Alira was still new, still fragile, but it was real. And in that bond lay the beginning of something greater than either of them could yet imagine. The council chamber was brighter than before. Lines of light ran across the walls, and the floor shone like polished stone. Delegates from many worlds filled the curved rows of seats, their voices rising and falling in many languages. The air was heavy with tension. Something important was about to happen. Ryan stood at the edge of the hall, waiting. His palms were damp, but his shoulders were steady. He knew this moment would test everything he had learned. Beside him, Alira stood tall in her silver robe. Her calm presence gave him strength. She looked at him once, her eyes soft yet firm, and gave a small nod. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke more than words. He was not alone. The council leader, an elder with skin like dark stone and eyes that glowed faintly, struck a staff on the floor. The hall grew silent. His deep voice carried through the chamber. He welcomed the delegates and named the purpose of the meeting. It was to decide the place of humanity among the stars. Whispers rose at once. Some spoke kindly, others with doubt. Humans were new, untested. Many believed they were not ready. Then the leader called for Ryan. The sound of his name echoed. Ryan felt his heart leap, but he stepped forward. His boots rang softly against the shining floor as he walked to the center of the chamber. A circle of light opened around him, marking him as the speaker. He stood straight, trying to keep his breathing calm. Eyes from every corner of the galaxy were on him. At first, he spoke in standard. His voice was clear, though not loud. He thanked the council for hearing him. He admitted he was not perfect, that his world was still learning. But he said humanity had one gift that could not be measured by machines. The gift of adapting, of reaching across barriers, of finding common voice. Some delegates nodded, others frowned. A few whispered again. Then Ryan stopped. He drew a slow breath. His next words came not in standard, but in the flowing language of Alira's people. The hall fell silent at once. The sound of that language, spoken in a human voice, was like a sudden spark in still air. He spoke carefully, slowly. His words were not flawless, but they carried weight. He said, "I come from Earth. I learn your words because I respect you. Machine cannot give respect. Only heart can. Only voice can." The silence deepened. No one moved. Alira stepped forward then, standing beside him. Her voice joined his, strong and proud. She spoke in standard so all could hear. "This human has learned more in days than many learn in years. He does not use a machine. He uses patience. He uses will. He uses respect. That is the strength of his people." Gasps spread across the chamber. Some delegates leaned forward. Others looked at one another with wide eyes. The council leader studied them both, his glowing eyes steady. He asked a question in the silver tongue, his voice calm but sharp. Ryan caught only part of it, but Alira repeated the question in standard. He asks if humanity can be trusted to honor others, not just itself. Ryan felt the weight of the hall pressing on him. He looked at Alira, then back at the leader. He spoke again in her tongue, shaping each word with care. "Yes. Humanity is small, but heart is large. We will honor. We will listen. We will stand with you." A ripple moved through the chamber. Some delegates clapped their hands in their own fashion, some struck the floor with staffs, and some simply nodded in approval. The leader raised his staff once more, and the chamber quieted again. He looked at Ryan for a long time, then turned his gaze to Alira. She gave a single nod. Finally, the leader spoke. His voice was heavy with meaning. "Then humanity shall have a place among us." The bridge is built. The hall erupted in sound. Some cheered, some argued, but the decision had been spoken. Humanity had been accepted. Ryan stood frozen for a moment, hardly believing it. Then Alira placed a hand lightly on his arm. Her eyes held a quiet smile. She whispered in her tongue, a single word he now knew well. "Respect." Ryan returned the smile and repeated the word. the bond between them was no longer just personal. It had become a symbol for two worlds, two peoples, stepping closer together. As the council ended and the delegates left, many came to greet Ryan. Some spoke in standard, others in their own tongues, curious if he could understand. He answered as best he could, always with honesty. He did not pretend to know more than he did. But he promised to keep learning. Later, when the chamber was empty again, Ryan and Alira stood by the tall windows. The red star burned in the distance, steady and strong. Ships drifted past like silverfish in a vast ocean. Ryan looked out and spoke softly. "I never thought my voice could matter here." Alira answered, her tone gentle. "It was not only your voice. It was your will. That is what opened the way." He turned to her, feeling gratitude rise within him. "Then we will walk this path together." She nodded. Together. They stood side by side, silent, watching the stars. The weight of doubt and laughter had passed. In its place was respect, and in respect was hope. For the first time, Ryan felt not just like a visitor among the stars, but a part of them. And he knew this was only the beginning. The bridge was built.